guys, this is EJ and here is my review of a school-provided iPad. My main purpose for making this video isn't to put out a full review of an outdated iPad, but rather to give you guys a first-hand account of what school-provided iPads are like. Now, iPads in general are nice devices. They're easy to use and are very well built. However, they're simply just way too expensive for what you get, especially the newer devices. Schools that are tight on money won't be getting the latest iPad Pro or the new 7th generation iPad. They're more likely to look at other models, such as the 1st generation iPad Air, the 4th generation iPad, or the iPad Mini 2, to keep their expenses at a minimum. Now, don't get me wrong, managing your expenses is extremely important. But when schools put tech in a classroom thinking that they'll be great for students when, in reality, they can't perform and can't live up to student expectations, something is terribly wrong. Just so you know, I'm currently an upperclassman in high school who's been using school-provided iPads in the classroom since my middle school years. It was sometime during my freshman year when my high school decided to distribute iPads as a replacement for textbooks and large notebooks. However, with applications like iMovie and Notability, it was obvious that these devices would become more than just a replacement for textbooks. I remember that my entire class was absolutely ecstatic to get iPads. Everyone thought it would be cool, enticing, great for our education, and all that stuff. It was a device that we could take home and use for, quote, educational purposes, but students were required to bring it to school every day, charged at 100%. Regardless of the terms, my class couldn't wait to get their hands on their very own take-home, school-provided iPad. Unfortunately, that excitement wouldn't last very long, and you'll see why throughout my review. The majority of students at my school were given 4th generation iPads. However, select students now have 1st generation iPad Airs. At other schools around my area, students have received 1st, 2nd, or 3rd generation iPad minis and don't use anything else. The iPad I received years ago was a 4th generation iPad, which is the device I'll be reviewing for you today. I don't have any other school-provided iPads in my possession, so I won't be able to talk about them today. The iPad I have is packed with a dual-core Apple A6X processor clocked at 1.4 GHz, an unidentified industry-standard dual-core GPU for low-tier tablets, almost 1 GB of RAM, a 5-megapixel rear-facing camera, 1.2 megapixel front-facing camera, a 9.7-inch IPS Retina display, a lightning port, headphone jack, and other specifications that were cool for its time. It came pre-installed with iOS 6, but it now has the latest version of iOS 10 installed. On paper, these specs don't sound very promising, and it really isn't. A 1.4 GHz dual-core CPU alongside 1 GB of RAM isn't enough for iOS 10, an operating system from 2016, to run smoothly on my low-spec 4th generation iPad from 2012, and unfortunately for me, it shows its worst when I need to use this iPad the most, in school. This iPad is way too slow. In fact, it's so slow that even Apple's lightweight virtual keyboard lags to the point where it's simply unusable. Additionally, multitasking is really hard to accomplish on this device. If you try to write an essay in, let's say, Google Docs, but you heavily depend on your textbook from iBooks for information, switching between apps is a pain. In a nutshell, the productivity aspect simply isn't there with the 4th generation iPad. It's slow, not very responsive, and simply isn't ideal for the classroom in 2017. If there is anything good about this device, it may be the battery life. Battery life is great when this thing is idling or running on standby. However, that long-lasting battery life immediately goes away once the iPad is in use. Simple applications like Notability, iMovie, Google Docs, Google Drive, and Google Chrome drain the battery on the 4th generation iPad like it's nothing. And because of this, my class has to deal with devices that sometimes can't even go through a single school day. When on standby, the 4th generation iPad won't discharge in large amounts by any means. But once this thing's in use, you better watch that battery percentage like a hawk. So if it isn't obvious already, I'm not a fan of the iPads that my high school has provided us. My school-provided 4th generation iPad is not by any means a performant device, but unfortunately, the majority of students at my school have them and are forced to use them. It seems as if my district just wanted to put tech in the classroom just for the sake of having iPads, you know what I mean? It, for some reason, just had to be iPads for them. Just iPads, nothing else. It's almost like no one stepped up to point out that these devices are plain as day subject to near-time planned obsolescence. Now, in case my district did acknowledge planned obsolescence in Apple products and did consider the alternatives, I apologize for my mild rant, but it just doesn't seem that way at all. And I've been having that feeling since day one of having my school provided iPad. In relation to the topic, I know for a fact that other schools in my area have adopted outdated iPads as well, but absolutely did not discuss any alternatives nor the consequences of choosing extremely outdated iPad models. If technology has to be put in the classroom, you cannot fall for the outperforming hardware for the sake of money, because if you do that, these devices will slow down and become more of a detriment to student education rather than a benefit. With that being said, I'd like to offer some suggestions and also some alternatives to my audience in the Department of Education. If you explicitly have to use iPads in the classroom and absolutely nothing else, then please don't make the mistake of buying outdated last generation iPad models for the sake of saving money. If schools continue to do this, these iPads will definitely become obsolete in the near future, closer than they may even realize. In addition to that, students will have a hard time getting something out of their education if the technology given to them, once again, cannot perform. If you're going to spend hundreds of dollars on an iPad that can't perform, someone has made a terribly bad decision and should probably get fired. There are two iPads that I explicitly recommend school districts to look into: 9.7-inch iPad Pros or the iPad Air 2. These two iPad models are the only devices in which I believe can perform beyond their date of obsolescence. I wouldn't go for the 7th generation iPad, aka the new 2017 iPad, because it's just an iPad Air 1 with some slightly better hardware and some slightly worse. I can see that device being defunct of usability within 5 years or less, considering how quickly iOS is advancing. Personally, I wouldn't go for iPads at all. I think the best way to go is with either the Chromebook or the Microsoft Surface. Chromebooks give you the best value for the price, offering a real laptop class experience that is sufficient enough for students to use and enjoy. With the iPad 4s, iPad Air 1s, and the iPad minis, students initially thought that they would enjoy the new devices when, in reality, they were a pain to work with. So that is briefly why the Chromebook would be a better option. Another alternative would be the Microsoft Surface Pro 4, a strikingly performant tablet that can replace a laptop. If schools wanted something a little bit more tablet-like while maintaining the productivity and footprint of a laptop, then the Surface Pro 4 is definitely a keeper. These devices aren't as inexpensive as the Chromebook, however, they're capable of doing a plethora of things that Chromebooks cannot do. One of those things includes support for pen input, which makes it really easy to take notes and do homework on this device. With the non-Pro model iPads, you're limited to your finger and a virtual keyboard that are both subject to exponentially increasing levels of latency as the device itself nears its date of obsolescence. So these alternatives are devices that I would consider over iPads as a whole. There are many more reasons as to why these are better choices for the classroom than iPads, but if I listed them all, this video would be way too long. So to summarize everything up, high schools around me have been putting iPads in the classroom, but they haven't been making the right decisions. The iPad I received was the 2012 4th generation iPad, known at the time as the, quote, iPad with Retina display, unquote, which is ultimately a pain to use overall. On paper, the specs are extremely low tier and is definitely not worth the price you pay today for one of these devices, which is about $400, maybe a little bit less. I would have chosen the 9.7-inch iPad Pro or the iPad Air 2, simply because they're more recent devices with internals that I think will actually last. Other iPads won't do the job, trust me on this one. However, if the options weren't limited to iPads, I would have strongly anticipated the adoption of Chromebooks or Microsoft Surface devices. That's all I have for you guys. I wanted to elaborate more on the topics I've touched on in this review video, but it would have been way too long. Ultimately, I'm not a fan of the iPads that my high school is providing, and I hope that this video will be brought to the attention of an individual in the Department of Education. I want them to see that I, an upperclassman in high school, am not satisfied with the iPad I received from my school, and that discussing any possible alternatives to the iPad need to be a required part of the tech adoption process. As for everyone else, don't take my words with a grain of salt. If the tech in your school isn't working for you, you need to bring it to the attention of your fellow classmates. When technology becomes a detriment to your education rather than a benefit, something is completely wrong and someone should probably get fired. I know that sounds kind of extreme, but I'm being 100% serious with all of you guys right now. Bad choices have no place in student education. I hope you enjoyed this video. Drop a like if you liked it, subscribe if you loved it. My time's up, so I'll see you again in my next video.